Um, I think there may be some folks that are still coming in, but I think we can begin. My name is Charles Strain. I'm a member of the Chicago chapter of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, which is one of the co-sponsors of this event. Um, there has been a stalwart group of Hyde Park, Chicago activists who kept this uh, commemoration alive over decades um, by gathering at the Henry Moore sculpture on the University of Chicago campus, led by Roberta Siegel, among others. This year, the university has closed down the campus, so we weren't able to meet there. But part of the good thing here is I think we have a number of people who are outside of Chicago who've joined us. Anybody outside of the Illinois area, if you could just put up your hand, Ann and Chick Lindsay and Marion, and well, welcome. So there are certain advantages to a virtual commemoration. Keep in mind that this is the first of two events this evening. At 8 o'clock, former colleague of mine, Yuki Miyamoto, who is the daughter of a Nagasaki survivor, has an international panel of Japanese and Americans affected by the bombing called "The Bomb Was Never a One-Way Affair." That will be at 8 o'clock this evening. So the basic format for this session is that we are going to begin with a silent reflection in which we try to wake up to the enormity and the horror of the bombing and the perilous character of our globe since then, but also wake up to our capacity to act, to change things, that we're not, this is not our fate. After that, there'll be a number of a couple of people who will be giving short talks. And then we'd like to open it up finally for shared reflection. So we hope that you will share your thoughts, uh, your suggestions, any suggestions for action in particular would be great. So as I said, we're going to begin with a silent reflection. And while that's happening, just to keep it relatively silent, we will mute everybody. And Jack Lawler, who is a Dharma teacher at the Lakeside Buddha Sangha, will lead us in that silent reflection. Jack?
Well, thank you, Charles. Let's reflect together for a moment before our meditation on the significance of this day. I think we know the details, but it might be good to just reflect for a brief time. 75 years ago today, the Hiroshima bomb was detonated 100 feet from its aiming point. Its fireball was over 3 miles wide. The temperature at the center of the fireball was over 100 million degrees. 70,000 people were killed instantly or within a few hours. Few of those who died were in the military. The next day, another atomic weapon was used against Nagasaki, and another 70,000 people, it is estimated, died as well instantly. I think it's healthy that we come together in this way once a year. It proves that we haven't become desensitized to that tragedy and to the continuing threat that the use of these weapons poses today. So may we always be troubled by the existence of these weapons, until they have been dismantled safely. We need ways to slow down and transform the prejudices that we have, our fears, our compulsiveness, and begin to learn to look deeply into what we have in common with each other, despite distractions and other priorities. So throughout the history of humanity, meditation and reflection has been found to be helpful to do that. So let's pause together and enjoy a few minutes of silence and contemplation. In many world traditions, people have found that it's been helpful to sit upright with our back straight, our chins tucked in. It might be helpful to practice some mouth yoga and to smile and just relax. It's helpful to enjoy a few cleansing breaths to make sure we're in touch with the wonderful capacity of the lung rather than breathing only through the upper part of the lung. It's useful to sit with our eyes half open and out of focus and just become one with the breath. Merge our attention in the breath. So we'll begin with the sound of the bell and enjoy a few minutes of meditation and reflection together. Dear friends, from time to time, we feel desensitized by what's going on. And when that happens, we tend to repeat the mistakes and tragedies of the past. So it's good to seek nourishment in what's sane and healthy. Let me offer the Buddha's short discourse on love. He or she who wants to attain peace should practice being upright, humble, and capable of using loving speech. He or she will know how to live simply and sanely, with senses calmed, without being covetous and carried away by the emotions of the majority. Let him or her not do anything that would be disapproved by the wise ones. And this is what he or she contemplates. May everyone be happy and safe, and may all hearts be filled with joy. May all beings live in security and in peace. Beings who are frail or strong, tall or short, big or small, invisible or visible, near or far away, already born or yet to be born. May all of them dwell in perfect tranquility. Let no one do harm to anyone. Let no one put the life of anyone in danger. Let no one out of anger or ill will wish anyone any harm. Just as a mother loves and protects her only child at the risk of her own life, cultivate boundless love to offer to all living beings in the entire cosmos. Let our boundless love pervade the whole universe, above, below, and across. Our love will know no obstacles. Our heart will be absolutely free from enmity and hatred. Whether standing or walking, sitting or lying, as long as we are awake, we should maintain this mindfulness of love in our own hearts. This is the noblest way of living. Dear friends, there is work ahead. In the past 2 years, important international agreements that had been in place, providing nuclear protocols and protection, have been denigrated and discarded by our own American government. How did that happen, and how do we restore the damage that has been done? Arms control boundaries have been eroded by our government, leading Iran to increase its stockpile of low enriched uranium, increasing enrichment levels, adding centrifuges, all to show Iranian frustration at the United States from withdrawing from the Comprehensive Plan of Action treaty. And although Iran has not formally exited the treaty, it is crumbling. And the growing number of armed clashes between the military forces of Iran and the US is troubling and could lead to tragedy. Another example of this erosion is that the INF treaty was allowed to officially conclude in 2019, leading the US and Russia to hasten competition to develop long-band weaponry. Further, it appears that the New START treaty will not be extended beyond 2021 by the US, although Russia is willing to extend. This has restricted the deployment of nuclear weapons and delivery systems for some time. As you just heard, recently the US is withdrawing from the Open Skies Treaty, thwarting the ability of the superpowers to have confidence in their intelligence about what one another is doing. and that's a misfortune. In short, we now live in an increasingly unregulated nuclear environment at a time when North Korea is asserting its prowess and US-China relations are at an all-time low. Meanwhile, enormous sums are being expended on the development of hypersonic weapons traveling at greater than 5 times the speed of sound. Dear friends, without commemorations like this, we might make the mistake of ignoring the dangerous situation that humankind and all life on this planet is on. Atomic weapons were unleashed on civilian populations 75 years ago. 75 years ago is a long time. It's easy to forget that things can happen after 75 years. But debate continues to this day whether the use of the weapons against Hiroshima and Nagasaki was necessary. Couldn't a demonstration have been staged? It's good that we're still asking these questions. It's good that those assembled today are deeply disturbed by the manufacture and presence of these weapons. Our coming together in this way demonstrates that despite the recent sensory overload, the chaos, the fear, the suffering arising from the pandemic, from staggering economic losses, and political rhetoric designed to fragment our society into bits and pieces, we haven't become desensitized. We've not lost the sense of outrage towards the manufacture, maintenance, and possible use of nuclear weapons. So we know that there's a lot to be done in the next 89 days. We need to register to vote, to encourage our friends and fellow citizens to vote, to cause peacefully the biggest turnover and change of heart in American history to occur. We can do very practical things by visit the Vote Forward website and other websites to learn ways to encourage voter registration and find other ways to be supportive. The late Congressman John Lewis would be smiling over your shoulder as you do so. So let's bring out the American electorate on November 3rd. Let's encourage all peoples concerned about nuclear danger and warfare to decide to work together to accomplish a peaceful transition of power in this country on November 3rd and dwell in sufficient centeredness, peace, and understanding to continue to love and serve the present age, transform the roots and means of perpetrating demonization, fear, and violence, and honor the memory of those who died and were injured at Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Thank you, Jack. Gail Snyder from the Nuclear Energy Information Service. You're muted right now. There you are.
There we go.
Uh-huh.
Well, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for your concern and time regarding this issue. And thank you to Charles Strain for organizing this event, as well as Roberta Siegel and Jack Lawler and Brad Little and many others who've done this same work on past events. I'm Gail Snyder, and I serve as president of the board of Nuclear Energy Information Service. We are a nonprofit organization based in Chicago. We're focused primarily on bringing an end to the use of nuclear energy locally here in Illinois, as well as in the country and the nation. By now, most of you have seen the footage of the explosion of the Beirut, Lebanon, linked to the storage of 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate on the edge of a harbor in a city of over 1 million people. Estimates are that over 130 have died and over 5,000 were wounded. 300,000 people are homeless, and as a result, the damages are estimated to be upwards of $15 billion. The pictures and videos of the devastation and impact to people as they went about their daily lives are heartbreaking. Now, I want you to think about, what if they had been warned? What if someone told them there is something dangerous stored in your community that can do so much damage that if you live through it, your community may not recover. Would people demand the danger be removed? Would they protest? Would they accept the risk and just keep living there? Our organization and others are sending out a warning that we have something dangerous in our communities, and it is nuclear energy and the nuclear waste it produces. If it was a nuclear power plant that melted down in Beirut, the damage would have been widespread and long-lasting. There would be no rebuilding and returning to their lives there. There would be no going back and getting the things that you once owned, and no rebuilding. The area would become an exclusion zone, like those created when nuclear energy power plants melted down in Chernobyl in the Ukraine and in Fukushima in Japan. Everything would be abandoned. There'd be no community to return to. Radiation levels could be so high that rescue efforts might not even be attempted. If you can imagine, if the white part of the explosion that you see on the video in Beirut was radioactive, thousands of people would be exposed to radiation depending on which way the wind was blowing. The difference being that in a nuclear meltdown, no huge explosion or shock wave would occur and no visible warning that radiation was coming toward you or was all around you would be obvious to you. It is invisible and deadly. The explosion in Beirut was small by comparison to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima and minuscule by comparison to the modern nuclear weapons countries have today, which if dropped on Beirut could easily kill 150,000 to 400,000 people instantly. By comparison, almost 160,000 people have died in the US so far from COVID-19, and that took several months. The connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons is clear. Nuclear reactors and nuclear energy facilities create the fuel for nuclear weapons. Recently, countries like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have advanced their nuclear energy programs. We would argue those countries don't need nuclear power for energy. The expansion of nuclear power brings with it the risk of nuclear weapons proliferation. If we want to say never again in regards to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we must address the dangers of existing and expanding nuclear energy. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you, Gail. I know that Neil Resnikoff of the Chicago Anti-War Coalition was here briefly. Is that you with the phone, or were you not able, was he not able to connect?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. Well, would you like to share a few words then?
Yes, I'm thanking everybody for holding this program. And I'm representing the Chicago Anti-War Coalition and the Albany Park, North Park, Mayfair Neighbors for Peace and Justice. So we're very concerned about the proliferation not only of nuclear weapons, but of other weapons and interference by the US government into countries far and wide. Now, as far as the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which killed hundreds of thousands of civilians from the internet sources that I looked at, and injured hundreds of thousands more, was something that the US government did, even though it was already clear that the Japanese government was ready to surrender in World War II. The aim, from again research on the internet, is and statements by government officials in their deliberations, is that the purpose of dropping the atomic bombs was to frighten others to allow US imperialism to dominate Asia and the world, an imperialism that's been continuing and expanding until this day, which means that we have the responsibility to take out the lessons of this ruthless killing, to as many people as we can. Because today the US government is still massacring people directly and indirectly through wars and murderous sanctions against Yemen, Iran, Syria, North Korea, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Haiti, Cuba, you name it. The US has sanctions against 39 countries. And the US has bases in over 800 bases in the world. Some of them are nuclear, but many are not, but the aim is still the same. The US government blockades import of needed food and medicine by countries in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, killing tens of thousands in Venezuela, Iran, and elsewhere. So it's not us that have been doing these things. It's a US ruling class and its government that's constantly threatening the world that if a country does not obey the US bully, the government has the power to destroy and obliterate that independent country. The bullying has the aim of helping the US banks and corporations make maximum profits from the resources and strategic position of the target country. And that bullying includes the threat that the US government reserves itself and its nuclear weapons. It reserves itself the right to use nuclear weapons as a first strike option, not just in response to an attack. So that's pretty dangerous and scary. But we must go out, as somebody else has already suggested, we must go out to everyday Americans to expose the lie that it's supposedly only the US government that can be trusted to use nuclear weapons or any other weapons or methods. The US always claims it's for good reasons. So we have to organize to carry out discussions and bring our flyers and petitions widely to talk about the rights of people everywhere to be free of the US government's threats of war with its unlimited power to kill all those who insist on their right to decide their own destinies without a nuclear cloud hanging over their heads. And no US government war on the people at home either, with the use of internationally illegal tear gas or anything else. Now, on the issue of politicians and the elections, we know that the campaigns of the politicians are financed by banks and corporations, by the billionaires and millionaires in the main. We need more and larger demonstrations and actions that will interfere with the government's plans for endless wars. And we need to work to create an anti-war government. And this will not be done through either of the main parties who are both war parties. So those are the comments I'd like to make this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. I have a few words to say, but then I want to open it up and hear from others of you, as many as we can. That will be great. I think we Americans are caught in a predicament to be able to focus only on one cataclysmic event at a time. COVID-19 has pushed the equally death-dealing reality of climate change to a back burner. In recent years, I have asked students if they were concerned about a nuclear holocaust, and I received only blank stares. These college students had no direct experience of the Cold War. One of my earliest memories of the Cold War was in grade school, where we were led out into the hallway where we knelt down and tucked our heads on the floor. for a nuclear war drill, somehow staying away from the school's windows was supposed to keep us safe in the event of a nuclear attack. I at least have that memory to draw on. When I asked students about climate change, however, they virtually all expressed great concern. So if climate change has been pushed to the back burner, the issue of a potential nuclear holocaust has been pushed out of sight, way beyond the back burner. The weapons, however, are still there. They're ready for launching. They're on their hair trigger. They are possibly slated for a first strike, as we just heard. In 1982, over 1 million people gathered in Central Park in New York to protest the Reagan administration igniting an arms race. We, however, have been lulled to sleep to the great peril of our entire species and many more species because, as Jack pointed out, the arms race has been reignited by the allowing several of these treaties to become defunct. I want to offer you two ideas that have helped me change the way I think a bit about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. My former colleague at DePaul, Yuki Miyamoto, herself a daughter of a Nagasaki survivor, who will also be leading this panel at the 8 o'clock this evening, just small commercial there. Yuki said she no longer uses the term Hiroshima survivor or Nagasaki survivor, but the term Hiroshima sufferer. You haven't survived the nuclear attack if the effects of radiation lurk in your organs and your bloodstream, taking their time to kill you. Her own mother died from the effects of the bombing, but many years later, and somehow our imagination doesn't take into account people who can be fatally affected 10, 20 years down the line. I want us to think about what it means to be a Hiroshima sufferer. And certainly those who were in either of those cities when the bomb occurred have lived and suffered it in a way that is hard for us to comprehend. But I also want to suggest that in some ways we're all Hiroshima sufferers. Though we live in denial, our lives have been blighted by the warping of our society, of its priorities, and its fear-driven abdication of responsibility to the person who holds the button. That is a form of suffering. The reignited arms race is budgeted, not counting cost overruns, to expend about $1.7 trillion over the next couple decades. I had a hard time getting my head around a trillion. We've heard a lot about trillions that are being spent already, but 1.7 trillions is a 1 and a 7 followed by 11 zeros. Another way to put it is a trillion is a million millions. 1.7 trillion is 1,700,000 millions of dollars that are be spent on weapons that become increasingly complex and hard for humans to control. Weapons that must never be used. Their use would be the worst imaginable war crime. We need, again, while we're petitioning and thinking, recognize that nuclear war is a criminal act, and that ought to be part of our discourse. The second idea I want to present to you is that of slow violence. It is a term used by environmentalists to describe how, for example, an oil spill affects the genetic process over multiple generations, leading to birth defects and sterility among many species, including the effects that enter the human species. 45 years after the end of the war in Vietnam, Vietnamese children are being born with defects caused by America's use of the defoliant agent orange in the war. Slow violence meant that those poisons entered into the food chain and eventually affect the birth process itself. To be a Hiroshima sufferer is to experience slow violence, both the literal poisoning of those exposed to radiation and the rest of us whose collective lives have been poisoned by the warping of our democratic institutions and by the squandering of our resources and the brainwashing that props up the whole system. If we are Hiroshima sufferers, we have a choice. We can remain passive victims, or we can act. We can work to remove the nuclear cloud that has overshadowed us for 75 years and threatens our future and the future of the generations who will come after us. We can be agents. In the next 3 months, the opportunities to get out the vote, as Jack was saying, and other strategies will be necessary, whatever happens in November, to bring us and pull us back from the nuclear brink. So I ask you to think a bit about these two concepts, about how it affects our lives as well as the people who were directly injured, to be Hiroshima sufferers, and what it means to understand how slow violence can creep into a nation's bloodstream. So thank you for that. Now I would like to hear from you all. If you can just sort of raise your hand, I can sort you out and call on people here. Somebody like to start us off with a few words? Yes, Gail. Yes, unmute yourself. Yeah.
There we go.
Mhm.
Today, someone forwarded me, it was a bulletin from the Illinois State Rifle Association's executive director. And he talked about, today being significant and what happened with Japan. That was accurate. He did the typical, oh, Japan, the Japanese were terrible and they did horrible things, which, yeah, horrible things are done on both sides. He talked about a professor he had who was in China, and he talked about the rape of Nanking and how the Japanese were. And then he sums it up with, dropping the atomic bomb saved both American and Japanese lives, which, you hear a lot of that argument. But what got to me was he said, I get tired of hearing about civilian casualties. In total war, there are no civilians. Although it is not something we like to think about, it is a fact. And it's very unsettling to me to hear people so casually kind of dismiss such a significant attack on a people and civilians in particular. And then I didn't really know this term total war, so I looked that up. And total war is when you're at war and there are no rules and nothing is sacred. Civilians are targets. Anything goes, and that's what he's talking about. And I don't ever want to I don't want to ever be in that. And I think that the mentality, and I think what you talk about, Charles, is that this creeping, the slow violence creeping into society in some way, in this idea of that people will kind of justify the civilian casualties in what happened, and civilian casualties in other wars that are going on right now. It's really difficult for me to understand how people make that leap. Just pointing that out.
Thank you. Somebody else? Yes, David. Meet yourself, David. David Weiner. Can you hear me? If you unmute yourself.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
It's interesting. I'm hearing a lot of things that I agree with and also am very concerned about. We have a tendency to, talk about attachment. Jack is still here, and you, Charles. In Buddhism, we're supposed to let go of what we're attached to. And I think some things we have to let go of is our attachment to righteousness. Many years ago, 2013, I took the Al Gore Climate Reality Project course to become a presenter to talk about climate change. And it's interesting, the first 4 hours of the course talked nothing about climate, but actually talked about storytelling and listening to people. And we have a sense in our society to demonize the other side, that we look at somebody like the Illinois Rifle Association, oh, they're a bunch of idiots, and brush them off. And that's very disconcerting to me. At the Climate Reality Product, they said, don't inundate people with data. All you're going to do is drive them in a corner and they'll be defensive. Rather, reach out to them and find out why they feel the way they feel. Try to understand their fears. Try to understand what is motivating them so that we can try to find a common solution. And that same sense of common solution is what Dr. King talked about so much, and that he learned at the Highlander Folk School as he trained to be a nonviolent activist. And the term beloved community was actually something that Jeremiah Royce, an American philosopher, came up with in the late 1800s. And to agree to disagree is not allowed. Rather, what we have to do is find our commonality and find our agreements that we can share with each other. And only by that, by bringing ourselves together, can we finally get rid of and let go of all the things that, quote, seemingly divide us. And I think it's very important. I'm very much, I was part of the Chicago Peace Movement back in the late 60s, been arrested by the police for let's say my activities, so I'm very much in support of the attempt to change our warlike behavior. At the same time, I do caution everyone to please, from my perspective, to look at it as not as demonizing, but rather as, in Buddhist terms, that these people have a delusion and we have to find our commonality. We have to find our commonality and to look at them not with contempt, but reach out to them as fellow beings so that we can achieve our common goals. Nobody wants to die in a nuclear blast. Nobody.
Thank
And
you.
I think that's something we have to realize and try to talk to. And so we could talk ourselves back from this brink instead of creating what the chief rabbi of England once called in terrorism altruistic genocide, that we're doing a good thing by getting rid of these people. We have to take care of them, like in Jack in the Metta Sutra that you read, which was a wonderful version of the Metta Sutra. I like to see that. It was a beautiful, beautiful rendering. How can we find commonality and help one another rather than see ourselves as divisive? It's important to take a stand. Yes, important to take a stand. But how can we, at the same time, reach out to others so that we're not in conflict in our hearts, let alone with weapons?
Thank you. Someone else? Others? Want to share something? Chick, Lindsay. Can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Actually, I was just bowing in gratitude to what David just said.
Hmm?
But I guess I will just take a moment then to appreciate what Charles, you said about how the potential tragedy of nuclear warfare does seem to have receded into the background of our awareness, and also for the reasons you say, not enough attention is paid to it. So I guess I say thank you for organizing this event today, then could be a part of it.
Somebody else? Somebody?
Charles, if I may, just one.
Wait, I have someone here,
Okay.
Dave. I go to Kate.
Sure.
Kate Zilla. You have to unmute yourself. Should be down the lower left of your screen. Little microphone there. Hmm. Well, we aren't able to hear you. I'm sorry for that. Someone else? Neil, is that something that you wanted to say?
I'm sorry. I'm
Oh,
unmuted.
okay,
It was
there you go.
It was telling me that the host needed to unmute me, and then all of a sudden I could. So a little miracle is something I.
Okay.
I'm new to this group, but I feel like there are kindred spirits here, and I just wanted to comment. A friend of mine was Bernice Barta, who was very against nuclear war in particular. And but more than that, Charles, you were saying something about slow violence, and it struck me that slow violence can also be ending the census a month ahead of schedule. It can be unidentified military people with tear gas and all kinds of weapons, AK whatevers, that they don't need to have and that police forces don't need to have, but there must have been leftovers that the government is selling them because we're not in enough wars, you know. So the slow violence, and I think maybe the whole, I think things are speeding up. I've heard that this is a time of great transformation into a second axial age, that we might not, those of us in our generations might not live to see the outcome, but that we can certainly do our parts here now to prepare for that. I don't know quite what we can do. I very much appreciated, Gail, what you said, and EIS and David Kraft, and but it's a feeling of just nice to be with kindred spirits and to have meditated together, but I really feel at a loss of action, I guess. Thank you.
James Locke. Was that a hand up, Jim? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm new to the group, and please take my comments with several grains and maybe shakers full of salt. But I am a fairly lifelong Hyde Parker, so I've been at the scene of the crime for a long time. But it seems to me that I came into this with a lot less sense of its relevance, immediate relevance, than I now realize as a result of listening to all of you. The reason I think it's relevant is because my sense is that, and I don't know how to parse this, but I think it's more than simply something that we have a misunderstanding about. And we need to talk together and figure it out. I have used for a long time, recently, the idea that there are people, not just in the US, but certainly in the US and elsewhere, who are in the grips of something I would call a death cult. And I think that's a horrendous end to the 21st century, that we thought maybe Nazism was the end of it. It wasn't the end of it. That people would go somewhat willingly into places that were unimaginable for their own life and their own well-being and the well-being of others. And I think if an article I was thinking of had to do with Jonestown and all the quotes at the time, well, it couldn't happen here. Well, it's happening here. And so it seems to me that the way to fight, I'm not a Freudian, I treat the death impulse as a major arrest and frustration and evisceration of the life impulse. And I think the way you fight it is by spreading life abundantly. I'm not sure we are doing that in our schools, in our classes, in our families, in our parks, in our music. I'm not sure we're spreading, I'm not sure young people today would say they understand, maybe they understand it better than we do, but that we're spreading a vision of what life abundantly is. And that sounds religious, but it's not. That's not Protestant sermonizing. It's about how you fight death by offering something that, in a sense, psychologically trumps it and undoes it. And we have some serious work to do, because Nagasaki and Hiroshima are facing us at the end of this cycle that we're in a lot of places, as we know. And so this is it's a very telling day for me. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you. Others? People we haven't heard from? Yes, the one woman who has a hand up, we don't have a name for you, so. Yes,
I think it's
Go ahead.
important, according to what David said, that we listen and that we vote. There is an enormous amount of money being spent on the Pentagon, on the military. And we just need to use that money and vote those people who recently did not even want to defund that by 10%. We just need to be in tune to that as well. That money could have been spent in a much more healthy way. That's it.
thank you. Others? What about people who I can't see? Mary Aronin and Steve Livingston. Either of you have some reflections? Maybe not. Others?
I would just say, if I may, again, Charles, one thing to build a little hope for you. If you haven't read it in a long time, please read Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. And there's one chapter where, because the man who is the lead protagonist in the book can go back and forth in time, he tells of a bombing run and how the planes fly backwards. And the bombs that were exploding on the ground suddenly come up and go back into the planes. And the planes fly backwards to their bases. And then the crews come out and take the bombs off. And then the bombs are taken back to the munition factories. And the munition factories take all the parts of the bomb apart. And then it's taken back to the earth. And the components of the bomb are buried deep in the soil, so they will never hurt anyone ever again. And I think of that as something to give us hope for the
So
future.
things that are made by humans can be unmade by humans as well.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
anyone else that we haven't heard from, or yeah. Okay, maybe we can end with a minute of reflection followed by a bell, Jack. Is that, can we do that?
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll begin and end with the sound of the bell.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for listening. And don't forget, there is a 8 o'clock event tonight. The bomb was never a one-way affair, with an international group of people directly affected by the bomb, including Japanese student activists. So